Much as I have an aversion to doom and gloom, you might have heard me mention it, unfortunately this talk about the BBC is rather dark and devastating because I find you can't accurately assess this particular organisation without going down a pretty dark and devastating route. But I will try and get a joke or two in there if I can. And the BBC really has been front and centre of the current narrative in terms of being the main source of propaganda and mind control for the masses. Unfortunately, it has picked up a reputation for being a bastion of truth and integrity. The power of mind control. And so many people seem to think that the BBC is telling them the truth about what's going on. And this current narrative could never have taken hold the way it has without the full complicity of the BBC and other mainstream media outlets, which is why I have nothing but contempt for them. But let's go into some aspects of the BBC in the spirit of this event, delving way back into history. So the British Broadcasting Corporation was started in 1922, initially putting out radio programmes, and programming the mind. Its first Director General was this fella, known as Lord Reith, and his mission statement was for the BBC to educate, inform and entertain. That was what it was originally set up to be all about. It quickly gained the nickname of Auntie, as if it was a close and trusted member of the family that you would let into your house because it was just friendly and trusted in that way. Its iconic premises from which it is broadcast for many decades is Broadcasting House in London. There's been a lot of controversy around this particular building over the years, and in particular, during some of the London protests that have taken place this year, many of them ended up spontaneously outside BBC Broadcasting House. And what the people were objecting to was this statue, which adorns the front entrance to Broadcasting House. It's known as Ariel and Prospero, based around the Shakespeare play. And what you have is a naked child writhing against the crotch of a male adult, and the male adult appears to be enjoying the experience immensely. So this, of course, is pedophilia, and the accusation of pedophilia and the encouragement and support of it is one that has stuck with the BBC for many years. So it does seem kind of apt that this statue is outside their building. They've been petitioned and campaigned against on many occasions to get this statue removed, but it still remains there to this day. One day it may get torn down. An interesting connection into Aleister Crowley, who always seems to pop up in my talks. He makes so many cameo appearances in Musical Truth Volume 1 because there are so many musicians and other famous people over the years that have expressed a reverence and a fascination with the dark occult magic of Aleister Crowley. So he has some connections tying into Jimmy Savile at the BBC, as we'll see. But an interesting thing here from the Notable Abodes website is that one of the addresses in London associated with Aleister Crowley is 2 All Souls Place in Fitzrovia. And that happens to be just over the road from BBC Broadcasting House. If we look at this Google map here, we've got All Souls Landing Place there, and on the other side of the road, Broadcasting House Reception. So Aleister Crowley had a residence very close to what became BBC Broadcasting House, which I just find quite an interesting connection there. Here he is. We cannot do a talk about the BBC and its true nature without bringing in Jimmy Savile, born on Halloween, appropriately, 1926. Died on the 29th of October 2011, and almost a year to the day afterwards came the revelations as to what he'd really been all about due to the documentary which was screened on ITV. The public got to know about Jimmy Savile having been a prolific predatory paedophile for decades, with many of his activities actually taking place on BBC premises funded by licensed players. So he was the host of Top and Pops for many years. He also had his own Jim Will Fix It show, and when we learn about some of the connections that he had into royalty and famous politicians, and then we factor in the idea of child prostitution and pedophilia and child sex trafficking, the phrase Jim Will Fix It takes on some different kind of connotations. It seems that Savile's activities were known about for many, many years before the public got to know. Once again, we're the last to know about these things. So, an excerpt here from my book. James Anderton, the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, is reported to have warned the BBC in 1975 that several of their performers, including Savile, had been named as using teenage boys who were being sold for sex in Manchester. Despite this, no former director of the BBC has been called on to address the question by Operation Injury, the exercise in damage limitation that was hastily set up in the wake of the scandal. It still beggars belief that with all the revelations that have come out about Savile, and I personally feel that that wasn't supposed to get out there. People have different opinions on this. Some people think that this information was deliberately put out there in a controlled fashion for some reason or other, but it's my personal feeling that the secret of what Savile was really all about was intended to remain a secret, but for whatever reason it didn't get out. But we have so much evidence that people on the inside knew all about what Savile was getting up to. And there was a famous interview done with Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols back in 1978. And I've got some audio from it here. Let's hear what he had to say.
You want to make a film? Would you like to make a film?
Yes. In it I'd like to kill a lot of people.
How many people?
Oh, about 200. Well, they'd all be famous names. I'd love to kill Mick Jagger on film, but I bet he'd never do it because his ego would be deflated or something absurd.
Might be good for his public image.
Yeah.
So who else is on the list then? On the goner list?
No, it's endless, believe me. It's easier to list the people I don't want to kill.
All
5 of them.
So how are you going to go about this massacre?
I don't know. I just want to make a film of it. On film, I'd like to kill Jimmy Savile. I think he's a hypocrite. I bet he's into all kinds of seediness that we all know about but are not allowed to talk about.
And Johnny Rotten complained that he had no further outlet on the BBC after making that comment. He did an interview with Piers Morgan a couple of years ago where they were reflecting on this, and of course they can all acknowledge what Savile was all about now because it's in the public domain, but it was covered up for many years. And when the revelations first came out, I remember many BBC famous presenters and broadcasters, Noel Edmonds, Esther Ransom, Bill Oddie, they were all saying, well, it was kind of a best kept secret in the corporation. Everyone knew that Savile was a bit of a wrong un, but you just knew to keep your mouth shut for the sake of your job. So apparently careers and salaries are more important than the sexual abuse of children. We have another interview here with Paul Gambaccini, BBC Radio 2 broadcaster and veteran from Radio 1, who went even further than all the other accusations that were coming out about Savile to accuse him of having been involved with necrophilia. So I told you this was dark and gloomy. Savile was a volunteer at various hospitals, including Stoke Mandeville in Aylesbury and Leeds General Infirmary, Royal Infirmary, where he was a volunteer in the mortuary. And we now know that that was what gave him access to the dead bodies that he craved. So we can take a listen here to what Paul Gambaccini had to say on BBC Radio 5, and listen towards the end at how quickly Nicky Campbell, the host, tries to shut him up.
It's like the American banker Willie Sutton who asked why he robbed banks. That's where the money is. Why did Jimmy Savile go to hospitals? That's where the patients were. Why, 10 years ago, did a reporter from the Scottish Sun go around a wedding posting that everybody at the Sun knew about the Savile necrophilia story? Was it because they did have a necrophilia story, or was it because people from the Sun just go around calling living celebrities necrophiliacs? Why did the News of the World and the Sunday People, which knew about this decades ago, not act?
That particularly lurid accusation that you've just brought to many people's attention is one that it's not been in the public domain.
I know that. Why not News International? You have a case to answer.
Well, it bothers me to say News International are not here to answer that particular allegation. What was Savile's travels? What was that all about? It was him and his producer went in a caravan up down the country or something.
So Nicky Campbell is a BBC man to his core, and he's trying to move the conversation on to Savile's travels to get away from the accusations that Gambaccini has just brought up there. So among the glut of celebs who were hung out to dry by Operation Yewtree, which occurred in the wake of the Savile accusations, included BBC It's a Knockout presenter Stuart Hall, comedians Freddie Starr and Jim Davidson, former BBC producer Wilfred Dayath, what a name, publicist Max Clifford, Ted Beston, known in BBC circles as Uncle Ted, go figure, and a one-time radio producer for Jimmy Savile and Tony Blackburn, BBC DJ Paul Gambaccini, who we just heard speak there, who was later vindicated. So he got caught up in all these accusations and had some levelled at him. And you've got to wonder whether that was some kind of smear campaign, because he seems to be that rarest of entities, a BBC employee who has a conscience and feels to speak out about things. And the former BBC Two, is there a pattern emerging here? Announcer and Radio 1 DJ Chris Denning. Also caught up in this glut of accusations was Rolf Harris of BBC fame, Rolf's Animal Hospital and his cartoon shows and all this kind of thing. And here's an interesting sketch which somebody identified from the satirical comedy Not the 9 O'Clock News. So this one went out in the early 80s, and given what we've now found out about Rolf Harris, it casts this sketch in rather different light. Just a funny sketch when it went out in the early 80s, but now we can ask ourselves whether they were trying to tell us something there from more who were in the know. For me personally, the sickest aspect of the BBC is their annual Children in Need charity money grab, which has been going on for decades and shows no signs of stopping. What is so sick about this is that it really does represent morbid mockery of the ignorance of the masses who think that they're giving money to help children in needy situations, whereas in fact the BBC has been involved in covering up certainly paedophilia and sexual abuse of children for many, many years amongst its own employees, as we've seen. But if we look at the symbolism involved with children in need, the mascot is Pudsey Bear right here. And I've done a lot of research into trauma-based mind control and satanic ritual abuse. I've covered how this plays out in the music industry in Musical Truth Volume 1, and there are various signs and symbols and icons and motifs which crop up in popular culture to give an indication that mind control is present and sexual abuse is present. One of them is the covering of one eye, which ties into Illuminati symbolism and all this. Another one is whenever you get bears or dolls or children's toys with limbs missing, such as an arm or a leg or an eye. This is symbolic of the fracturing of the child's innocence that has occurred through the horrific trauma that they're put through satanic ritual abuse. And when you see a design of coloured spots or dots, that has also been identified as an indicator of mind control. So with Pudsey Bear, we get the whole lot. You know, the fact that it's a child's toy, it's got one eye covered up, indicating that the eye is injured, and then it's covered up with this spotted cloth. And somebody pointed out to me when I made a post about this in November, just drawing on the hypocrisy of BBC Children in Need still being rolled out every year, that even when you look at the name Pudsey Bear, if you break that down, the first part of it, Pud, is a slang word for a penis. And S-E-Y, the last part, if you reverse it, it becomes yes. So it's almost as if in the name of the bear, it's saying yes to sexual abuse. It is deeply sick. In the early days, Pudsey Bear appeared inside a pyramid, which is yet more, Illuminati and secret society mystery school symbolism, indicative of the control system that we have, as exemplified by the BBC. In early shows, you had Pudsey Bear in the background, again with the bandage over his eye, inside the pyramid, and the hypocrisy of some of these shows was that individuals who are now known to have been predatory paedophiles were actually presenting this show and imploring the public to give up their cash for all these poor kids when they were actually responsible for abusing them themselves. We've got an image here of Rolf Harris up on stage with a giant Pudsey Bear. On one particular show, they wheeled out Gary Glitter as a great choice to be drawing attention to the plight of sexually abused kids. Then you have Comic Relief, which is the BBC's other charity money grab that they put out every year. And there's been some controversy over this over the years. Investigative reporters have looked into where the money has actually gone from this particular event. And so we find that in 2013, some of the money raised, far from going to help people in need in Africa, had been invested in tobacco and arms companies. The findings were even reported in an episode of Panorama broadcast by the BBC itself. And Lenny Henry, the friendly face of Comic Relief for many years, was made a Knight Bachelor in the Queen's Birthday Honours in 2015 for services rendered. So continuing to look at some high-profile broadcasters out of the BBC over the years, we have Alan Fluff, wonder how he got that nickname, Freeman, who was the original presenter of Pick of the Pops on the radio, and we find out some things about him. Apologies that this talk is rather text-heavy in certain parts. It kind of has to be to convey the information. It's rather boring looking at all this writing, but it's kind of needed to convey the story. So, Alan Fluff Freeman, long-time host of Pick of the Pops, in September 2013, 7 years after his death, UK newspapers ran a story of a man who claimed Freeman and Savile had raped him at a party in a London flat, in the same block in which Freeman himself lived, when he was a schoolboy. The Daily Mirror said, speaking out for the first time since being interviewed by detectives, he claimed Freeman and Savile showed me no pity and arrogantly thought they could get away with anything. And that seems to be the way that many of these people conducted themselves in their heyday. Savile famously used to make the comment, don't forget who I am, don't forget who I'm connected to, whenever he was challenged, as if he felt that he had protection from on high, and his activities would never be found out. Well, they weren't for as long as he was alive. But these people did seem to move with that assurance that they were never going to be exposed for what they were up to. And most of them have only been exposed posthumously. Then we have this rather tragic story. In 2012, the Daily Mail carried the story of a 15-year-old schoolgirl, Claire McAlpine, who'd been a dancer on Top of the Pops. She'd been discovered dead by her mother in 1971, apparently the result of a suicidal overdose. Claire had left behind a diary for her parents, in which she'd written accounts of how she'd been sexually abused by a string of BBC presenters and celebrities. And the Daily Mail reports the allegations made and casually dismissed both within and outside the BBC, that's a surprise, by Claire McAlpine all those years ago, can point only to one dreadful conclusion, that far from being alone, the predatory behaviour displayed by Jimmy Savile, national icon and charity fundraiser, was common among many big show business names of the time. A question I've often had is, who decides who is a national treasure? So we had Jimmy Savile just thrust out there in the public spotlight, all over the TV, all over the radio, and he was always described as a national treasure. Rolf Harris was described as a national treasure. So this is an aspect of social engineering, where we're entrained to think of famous people in a certain way. It's not us who decide that they're national treasures, it gets decided for us. And going back to BBC Radio, John Peel, long-time broadcaster on Radio 1, was always thought of as being outside of the regular kind of glut of smashy and nicey style, cheesy Radio 1 DJs. He did this alternative show where he would play underground music, and he championed all these different styles and all these different bands that wouldn't get airplay anywhere else. He had a huge fan base and a massive following as a result, and he was always seen as being slightly anti-establishment. Well, John Peel's name was actually John Ravencroft, and he came from a very wealthy family, an aristocratic family. And he worked very hard to disguise his public school accent. If you listen to some of his early radio broadcasts, you can quite clearly hear that public school twang. But towards the end of his career, he worked to successfully disguise it and pass himself off as far more working class than he actually was. So we find out some stuff about John Peel. It seems even Mr. Alternative, Mr. Anti-Establishment is not immune from the sickness and the disease that seemed to afflict so many DJs at BBC Radio. So before joining Radio 1, up until his death in 2004, Peel worked at a Texas radio station in the early 60s. In later interviews, he recalled some of the perks of that particular period as involving many girls, some as young as 13, queuing up outside his studio to offer him sexual favours. Well, of course, I didn't ask for ID, Peel said. All they wanted me to do was to abuse them sexually, which of course I was only too happy to do. And Peel ran a Schoolgirl of the Year competition on his radio show for many years, where he invited listeners to send up pictures of schoolgirls in uniform, and he even posed in school uniform himself for this promotional picture. So we're seeing a rather different side to John Peel now, aren't we? Someone who can be said to have been way ahead of his time, because he got busted for pedophilic activity long before Savile and all the others, was Jonathan King, also a long-time BBC broadcaster. He had Entertainment USA on BBC Two, and he did various other BBC programmes as well. So King was convicted of various accounts of molestation of children, and of course there he is hobnobbing with Savile. He was unrepentant to the end, you know. Straight after he got released from his first jail term, he was right back looking at child porn, allegedly, showing no remorse for anything he'd done. He's never apologised for any of his acts. He doesn't seem to feel that he's done anything wrong. So we find out this from the Coleman Experience, which is a website I used to go to a lot. They used to have some real hard-hitting blog articles there, delving into the dark underbelly of British establishment. It's much harder to get on that website now. It's kind of behind a paywall, so I've not looked at it recently. But they were putting out some great articles going back a few years. In this particular one, documents presented in Operation Arundel's court case against DJ Jonathan King were that he invited back boys from the Walton Hop Club in Walton-on-Thames, and would also drive around in his Rolls-Royce outside schools, enticing boys into the car to help him with a pop quiz. He had a secret fantasy room, a large rectangular suite in his Bayswater mansion, bedecked in lush black leather sofas, large swastika flags hung ceremoniously from ceiling to floor. And the Walton Hop involves many other famous names as well. It was allegedly pulling ground to get in these young boys who would then be sexually abused by many of the adults involved. The manager of the Bay City Rollers name comes up a lot. What was his name? Tam somebody or other. Can't remember his name right now. But there are other names associated with the Walton Hop. It's quite an infamous venue. So there was quite a bit of controversy after Jonathan King had already been convicted of many of these counts, when the BBC then invited him on a show that they were putting together about the group Genesis. So Jonathan King is credited with having discovered Genesis when they were all pupils at Charterhouse Public School in Surrey. He became their first manager and put them on the map. So when the BBC were putting together this documentary about Genesis, apparently no one else would do. It had to be Jonathan King that they would wheel out, despite the fact that he was a convicted paedophile by that point. The BBC still felt it appropriate to have him on the show talking about his recollections of Genesis. Going back to the Coleman Experience blog site, there was a fascinating article back in 2014 where the writer is drawing attention to the strange and unexplained deaths of many BBC celebrities who died in some quite unusual circumstances. And he names the likes of Christian Digby, Natasha Collins, Mark Spade, Kevin Greening, Rick Mail and Mike Smith. And the article questions whether these individuals may have had some knowledge of a paedophile ring operating within the BBC itself, and whether their untimely deaths could be related to that in some way. So we had Mike Smith, who for a time was the BBC Radio 1 breakfast show DJ. He died following complications from heart surgery a few years ago. Christian Digby, who presented some TV shows, he died, or he was found in his flat having apparently overdosed. Kevin Greening, who was also a one-time Radio 1 breakfast show DJ, was found having apparently overdosed on cocaine, ecstasy and heroin in his flat by his boyfriend, we're told. Then we have Natasha Collins and Mark Spade, who were a couple. So Mark Spade was involved in CBeebies, the children's channel on BBC. BBC should not be allowed to operate a children's channel, they really shouldn't. So Natasha Collins was discovered dead in a bathtub a few years ago. Apparently Mark Spade came back to the flat that they shared together and she's dead in a bathtub. And we're told that she overdosed on some substance or other. Death by bathtub occurs a lot in the music industry. I draw attention to it in my books. Many celebrities have turned up dead in bathtubs, from Jim Morrison to Whitney Houston, and it's always chalked up as some kind of unexplained overdose or other. We never really get the full details, it's just left at that. Then Mark Spade himself was discovered a short while after that, hanging from the rafters of a disused building as part of London's Paddington Station. It's a very difficult part of the building to get into. It's kind of in a courtyard, and we're told that he was so devastated at his girlfriend's death that he hung himself. And then we come on to Rick Mail of Young Ones fame. He famously had an accident on a quad bike back in 1998, which left him very badly injured, and he then died in, I think it was 2014, sometime around then, of heart failure. But I've got a couple of videos here of Rick Mail. One of them is from the last film that he made. And have a listen to the subject matter and the comments that were being discussed in this particular film, made shortly before Rick Mail turned up dead.
The New World Order. Population reduction.
There will be a global population reduction until there are only 500 million people there.
How would they reduce the population? We're not stupid.
Hitler said, the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it.
I think it will be done Hitler style. The armed forces are going to kill us. They'll follow orders, it's what they've been trained to do. They've been taught to be racists. The army are already killing people in other countries. People in power are using fear to fuel the racism. How long before they use this racism to make soldiers turn on their own?
Mass genocide on a scale never seen before. There are massive ways they could introduce population slaughter, more staged events, orchestrated and maneuvered conflicts, and the use of bioengineered diseases, vaccines. It could come in vaccines.
In the event that I'm reincarnated, I'll have to come back with a deadly virus. So to contribute to solving overpopulation. Prince Philip said that.
For most, this is nothing more than a story, a diversion from the outside world. But within some of you, a feeling is starting to stir. It's time to stand up, with eyes open, ears down to the ground. A change is long overdue. So wake up. Question everything. Are you awake?
Of course, we all know about all that stuff. It sounds very familiar to us. But a question becomes, was Rick Mail's rather sudden death related to what was being conveyed in that movie, One by One? Clearly, he was very clued up on what the agenda was and knew all about the Georgia Guidestones and such. Got another interesting video here of Rick Mail just a short while before his death as well, and he's got some interesting comments to make to the camera.
You don't know? Viewers, you don't know who the cameraman is.
No.
You don't know why you're being made to see these things. possibly are. You don't know it's the man who's making things you're not supposed to see. Destroy your television sets. Now, just listen to no orders. That's all I can tell you at this point of humanity. That's our potential.
I didn't understand it.
Throw out your TV sets, some good advice.
I've watched that before and I cannot understand what he's saying there. It's really bad audio.
He's saying, I may be dead by the time you see this, and you don't really know what you're seeing on TV, you don't know if it's real. And then he just ends by saying, throw out your TV sets. So the idea of a paedophile ring operating within the BBC made the mainstream when newspapers reported the death of Jill Dando in 1999. And this is now from the Daily Express from 2014, this particular one, when it actually states Jill Dando raised the alarm about a paedophile ring at the BBC. Many people think that her murder was connected with her getting a little too close to the truth about what really goes on in the corporation. So again, this is from my first book. There's strong evidence to suggest that BBC journalist Jill Dando was in the process of investigating, as I've just said, when she was shot in the head at point blank range on her London doorstep in 1999. A friend and retired co-worker of Dando stated, I don't recall the names of all the stars now and don't want to implicate anyone, but Jill said there were surprisingly big names. I think she was quite shocked when told about images of children and the information on how to join this horrible paedophile ring was readily available. Someone's also put together a list of BBC employees that have been involved in various dodgy activities of one kind or another, not necessarily paedophilia as such, but fraud and financial crimes and all this kind of thing. And believe me, the list is endless. That's just the start of it. And just getting more up to date now and more topical, this book recently came out by an author named David Sedgwick called BBC Brainwashing Britain. And he's done a great job of looking into the way in which this propaganda arm for the government, mind control institution on behalf of the state, operates to get inside people's minds, shape and mould their perceptions and their ideas. And they've done a very successful job of it with the general public, as we well know. So the back page of the book reads, the people of Britain are under attack. We're being brainwashed. We're being brainwashed completely, ceaselessly and cynically. So just who is doing the brainwashing? How are they doing it and for what purposes? Just reading on, every time we engage with BBC content, the author argues, we are exposing ourselves to a very dark art, the art of brainwashing. Willful, deceitful and incessant Orwellian parallels define the modern corporation and should chill the soul of all who cherish freedom and liberty. Mind control is here, this is not fiction. We have a review of that book from somebody on Amazon who states, David Sedgwick accuses BBC employees of having a hive mentality, the like of which doesn't exist in other large corporations. He says, and quotes ex-employees as saying that if you're a wrong thinker or read the wrong newspapers, you will never progress within the BBC. He refers to their journalists as activists, regurgitating other left liberal tweets and news sources rather than doing their job of investigating. Often, these journalists are giving personal views instead of facts. That's what the BBC has now become, very far from its original Lord Reithian intention of being to educate, inform and entertain, and being known as auntie because it's like a trusted member of the family. The BBC has changed a lot in recent years, and it's certainly played its part in getting the official narrative of what we're currently going through into the minds of the general public. Got a bit of an amusing sketch here, you'll be pleased to know. This is from Ricky Gervais's Extras show of a few years ago, and I still don't know how he got away with this one. Keith Chegwin was the guest. How Ricky Gervais got the green light to put this out on BBC Two, I just don't know. But Keith Chegwin, now deceased, drops a bomb as to who runs the BBC.
14 years in the deal at the BBC. Swap shop, Checkers Place pub, all sorts. Stolen by Jews and queers, is it? It's what, this place? Stolen by Jews and queers.
I think there are some Jewish people and some gay people, yeah.
Actually, John Lennon made a comment similar to that once about the world is run by, I can't remember the exact language he used, but you know, it's like Jews and queers was what he was saying. So that comment came up again there. Occasionally, BBC broadcasters break the ranks and it seems have an attack of conscience and feel the need to leave the corporation and speak out about what they've experienced there. One of them was Peter Sissons, who a few years ago, after many, many years of reading the BBC News, had some public comments to make about the bias and the propaganda that comes through BBC News. He said it had become a factory. Peter Sissons attacked the corporation for paying huge executive salaries while allowing BBC newsrooms to become factories run by poor kids. He's now deceased as well. More recently, we had an interview by Anna Breeze with Sue Cook, who for many years fronted BBC's Crime Watch alongside Nick Ross. And there's more stuff to know about Nick Ross as well, and the true nature of Crime Watch when it comes to that. But Sue Cook did this interview a few weeks ago, and she's very much addressing current events here in relation to the BBC. It's a few minutes long, but I think it's worth listening to what she had to say.
To put across. Well, yes, things have changed a lot since the days I worked for the BBC. I think we were much more investigative, whether it's to do with money or some kind of ethos coming from above. I actually don't know, but we would have been straight down to investigating all sorts of things. We don't take anything on trust. You wonder why these PCR tests are, so many people are saying they're flawed. You'd look at them, you'd look at the way they're run, you'd look at the way they're funded, you'd be a bit shocked to find that they're not NHS tests at all, it's privatised. So who is Serco, what's in it? Who makes up Serco, this company that runs the tests? Why are they flawed? Who is saying they're flawed? And in what way are they flawed? And how might that skew the results? That's one investigation. I'd like to investigate who SAGE are. Who's on the SAGE? Who are these people? I gather they chop and change. It's not the same people on the committee all the time. So I'd like to know who they are. PHE. What is PHE? Who's on that and how is that funded? And I thought the government has announced that they weren't going to be talking to PHE anymore, but Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance are up there on the press conferences, so presumably they are still talking to PHE. But that's the sort of thing that I'd like to investigate. I'd like to look into all the figures. I'd like to investigate the legalities of everything. I did present a programme called Out of Court at BBC Two for 5 years. And we have been all over the legalities of these restrictions that are being imposed on people, the lockdowns, the fines of £4,000, which are untenable, the amount of money to fine people. The lack of democracy, how can these things be the law when there's been no democratic way of ratifying them? All the people who represent us, the MPs, what do our MPs think? I mean, I'd like to go out and talk to the MPs and find out what they think, get them on. But you don't see them platformed. I think that's another thing that annoys me about the BBC is the people they choose to platform and the people they don't. So I've seen on Twitter and on various other media some really interesting people like Professor Carol Sikora, Carl Hennigan, Ivor Cummings, all kinds of very interesting, Michael Yeadon, Michael Levitt, but all you see, you see, for some inexplicable reason, you see Neil Ferguson all the time. You see Neil Ferguson being wheeled out. What a discredited, what a load of things he's got wrong in the past. But I would like to see some other people, other voices, and the other person they wheel out all the time is Debbie Sridhar, who just negates everything and fearmongers and doommongers. And so I don't know. I feel there isn't enough balance. And I don't want to give my opinions on things. That's not a BBC journalist's job at all. The job is to give everything a fair hearing and let people make their own minds up using the facts in front of them.
Well, that's certainly what I hope to do on this channel.
Yeah, a voice of reason, and one which you don't hear on the BBC. So the longer it remains around, the more of a problem the BBC becomes in terms of the mind control that it perpetuates out there. And this is a bit of a closing statement from my book, again, Musical Truth Volume 1, where I went into the BBC in some detail. The Jimmy Savile scandal, it just amazes me that that didn't spell the end of the corporation, that people just chalked it up as, oh, isn't it terrible about Jimmy Savile? Still, I guess he was just one bad apple that slipped through the net, and, you know, he got away with it for 5 decades and nobody knew about it, and he was best friends with Prince Charles and the Queen and Margaret Thatcher and Ted Heath. And none of them knew about it. You know, I'm sure the Queen was so shocked and so saddened to hear about it. And I'm sure we were all expecting the Queen to address it in her Christmas message of that year and explain how she was so close to Jimmy Savile. She didn't. But, you know, people just seem content to chalk it up as just that. And everyone's moved on from it. You know, this news broke in 2012 and people are still watching and trusting the BBC. And I just made the observation that the Savile scandal should have spelled the end of the BBC, or at the very least led to a nation so collectively outraged by what had been going on right under their noses that they refused en masse to continue paying the licence fee that funds the BBC's activities. Somewhere in a parallel universe stands a country of aware, morally motivated people where exactly that has happened, but not, sadly, in this one. Maybe we'll get there one day. And I just made the observation that Two Little Boys by Rolf Harris, I'm the Leader of the Gang by Gary Glitter, the young ones, Cliff Richard, dodgy one there. Yeah, we'll leave him alone for a second. And Jonathan King's Let It All Hang Out are 4 songs you needn't expect to hear on the radio again anytime soon. So I'm sorry this one was a bit doom and gloomy, but as I say, you can't do justice to a thorough investigation of the BBC without going into dark and devastating territory. So, a bit of a brief one today. Just a reminder of my books, which are over there. Tomorrow, my talk is going to be on Manufacturing the Hippie Dream, all about the 60s counterculture flower power scene, which the official narrative runs was this organic grassroots movement that just came out of young people's reaction to the injustice that was going on in American society at the time. But there is much evidence to show that this, like so many other movements, so many other trends, was co-opted and to a very large extent created by the intelligence services, particularly the CIA. So I'll be going into that tomorrow morning. That's it for this one. Thanks again for listening. And I guess we'll do a few questions if anyone's got any.
I just, in the interest of being positive, the TV, trying to cancel your TV licence is a lot more difficult now than it used to be, which shows that there are literally thousands of people cancelling, and people are waking up to it. So, you know, it is moving into the...
And there are ways of getting out of paying it, I know, if you know what you're doing and you study.
Well, you can do it, but they've made it so much more difficult.
They've taken the option off
than they
their
did
website
6 months ago, because of the, you know, droves of people looking to cancel, and you can do it very easily.
And I understand that people are kind of tricked into entering into a contract to gain the TV licence when in fact you're not obligated in any way to get it. They just make you think that you are. Most people fall for the trick and they think it's law and they just have to pay it. But there are ways of avoiding that if you know how to go about it.
You just go through. No, the cancelling the payment doesn't do it. It's the hoops they go through on the website.
It does do it.
But you can do it. I mean, it's just they're making it more difficult because there's so many people, which is possible. You can cancel it, but then they...
Yeah, there's a question.
Just to say, I've not watched TV for about 6 years, so I've had a little bit of experience with this. And I waited until I got a knock on the door, and I invited them in very nicely, even though I really wanted to shout at him, poor bloke, because it wasn't his fault. But I invited him and I showed him that there was no, what do you call it? Aerial. And I showed him my laptops to show that I hadn't downloaded any apps. And he said, right, you'll not hear from us again, I will officially take you off the list. And I know that there's one old woman at 75 who's had threatening letters, and she's an old woman, and she's written back saying, I really don't do it. And I said to her, you invite them in and you show them. They have to go.
Well, I've done that twice, and I'm over 75, and I'm still getting letters.
Me too.
I've had them in my house twice to show them I have my television. I've written to them twice and
long as you don't engage with them and let them in, then they have nothing on you.
I'm just saying, even if you are excluded from because I am, and I'm on pension credit as well, so I'm fully, now they should know that, and yet they still.
All right, we're getting a bit chaotic, so let's take another question.
I did go into the BBC some years ago personally. I was outraged because to me it's a paedophile protection organisation. I asked for the complaints department, they didn't want one, they didn't have one, which was outrageous. And the guy they had to get someone from Human Resources, and I said, you're a pro-Zionist, ultra-left-wing organisation who is complicit in the genocide of the poor Palestinians, and you hide behind all this. I said, you lie, you're anything but an unbiased organisation. I said, what can we do legally? Because they've been fraudulently forcing us to pay for this corruption through our TV licence fee for decades. What can we do legally to sue them and put them out of business? Do you know? Does anybody know? Well, we've got to get rid of the contract collectively. Well, I don't pay the licence. And I implore everybody else not to do it either, and don't let them in. It's outrageous what's this company. It's just satanic. The end of the BBC is nigh.
Well, maybe it will. You know, I mean, 2020 has taught us that many unexpected things can happen. So, stranger things do happen. Maybe the BBC is death throes. Who knows?
Thanks, Mark. I'd just like to say a couple of things on the.
Can we have one meeting, please?
Just like to say a couple of things on people coming to your door and asking to see your licence or see your television receiving equipment. As Mark said, you do not have to engage with them at all. It's happened to me several times. I just said to them those words, I don't wish to engage with it. And the guys have always gone, okay, thank you very much, have a nice day. So, there is nothing they can do. And they know it. And another point on this, which I found quite amusing, I found out a few years ago that, you remember the old TV detector vans? They're all fake, empty shells. There is nothing in there. There is no technology available to detect television signals being received by someone's house. It's just not physically possible. So that was just another obvious waste of taxpayers' money, or licence payers' money.
And just the fact they need to resort to such deceitful tactics tells you everything you need to know about their true nature, right? Who isn't?
Have you got any thoughts about the World Service? I mean, it's just a question. The World Service, yeah, and the output of the World Service, because it's pretty well revered, you know, and it is all over. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just asked about the BBC World Service. I don't know a great amount about their content and such, but obviously it's syndicated all around the world, so the propaganda and the mind control gets beyond Britain and around the rest of the world there. So, yes.
So, like, when you're dealing with BBC, I've never paid a TV licence. I've never, luckily, had anything come through. I've had it online. I mean, you haven't even, we haven't here. We've just never had this, but I guess if you had, as part of it, Christina just said, why do they should be paying us to watch it? And I said, well, that's not part of it, because you have to give your money as energy as consent to what they're doing, the trickery, and for it to work, mind control kind of programming. But when you're dealing with these types of people, it's like when you're dealing with bailiffs, credit card companies, and all of that. I think you have to have a level of assertiveness, like that man was saying. And if they sense any type of, like, if these agents that come round that are employed to their job sense any type of, like, vulnerability, or you let them in energetically in any way, they will proceed to enter as the pension forces of
conditional acceptance. I will accept your invitation to contract a TV licence if you can explain to me how every Director General of the BBC from 1954 to 2012 was unaware that Jimmy Savile was abusing children in his BBC dressing room. If you can present me with, that information, I'll be happy to contract with you on that condition.
Most of the time just go, no worries, startle them. Yeah.
Okay, we'll have one more question at the back there.
The present leader of the Labour Party, Stammer, when he was senior prosecutor, he refused to prosecute Jimmy Savile on the basis there wasn't enough evidence.
Do you know what time scale that is? What kind of year that was?
2009.
Right. Keir Starmer, yeah. I mean, we think we got it bad with Boris Johnson right now, but from what I've seen, if Keir Starmer was in office, things will be even more communist. All right, well, I'm about done here, so thanks again. Are we going for a break, or do we have the next speaker? Tea break? Okay, tea break.